All right, we'll go ahead and call the meeting to order. The August 17th Board of Education special meeting. Roll call, please. Ms. Haas.
Mr. Nickram?
Here.
Mr. Paul?
Here.
Mrs. Reynolds? Mrs. Sneathen?
Here.
And Mr. Cheney?
Here. Thank you. And as we always do, we will read the mission statement of the School District of Fort Atkinson. The School District of Fort Atkinson is committed to delivering the quality opportunities and services each student needs to achieve his or her academic and personal potential. With that out of the way, then I will go ahead and open up to agenda item A, which is human resource topics, including a lot of stuff.
All right, good morning, everyone. So I think we are all accustomed to incredible complexities related to pandemics at this point in time. And among those are an overused word, but accurate myriad of HR topics that are equally complex as they are difficult to make sure that everyone has a common understanding. And I know our Director of Human Resources, Mandy Harper, has been working tirelessly at positioning us and, more importantly, helping our staff get the services, supports, accommodations, or other access to items that they are entitled to based on COVID-19. So we felt that it was important to get the board together and have a conversation just on some of these HR topics, and also bring in our expert and our district council. So with that, I'll turn things over to Mrs. Harper, and you can make other introductions as you'd like.
Good morning. As you may know, I shared out a memo late last week to kind of give you a brief overview of what we would be discussing this morning. A little bit of history. I'm sure you noticed a lot of acronyms in there that, as Dr. Abbott shared, there are a myriad of different things that we're navigating right now, the normal laws that we must comply with by way of the Americans with Disabilities Act and the FMLA, and then other items that were added as part of the CARES Act. As Dr. Abbott shared, we invited Shayna Lewis, our legal counsel, in today to give you a more in-depth look at what these laws require us to do as an employer, and how that supports our staff. And then there are also some items that the district has discretion on that we've made some recommendations on. So without further ado, Shayna, if you want to take it from here. And
Sure. So first of all, it's really nice to meet all of you. I had hoped to meet you in person, but yeah, that's not going to happen right now. And at some point in the future, we will all get together and have the opportunity to connect in person. And my fingers are crossed that that's going to happen sooner rather than later. But in the meantime, this is a good alternative to allow you to have the opportunity to hear what the laws require of you and to ask any questions that you have about what you are permitted to do, what you are prohibited from doing, and kind of where the discretion lies. I do want to just give you a little bit of background of myself and my firm, just so that you understand where we're coming from. We represent over 100 school districts across the state. I think we're up to about 120. And as you might imagine, the school districts across the state are doing things differently. Some school districts are inviting students in full time. Other school districts are completely virtual for the foreseeable future. And most of the school districts that we're working with have some kind of a hybrid plan. That is a decision that is a local decision, at least for now. And so as we are working with different school districts about their employment related issues, we are having mind what they've decided to do with regard to their students, because all students attending virtually, having staff working remotely is not as big of a as as it is when you have staff who need to be in person in the district, so as to avoid having classrooms of minors unsupervised and kind of left to their own devices. So we really have a whole gamut. So if you're going to ask questions like, well, what are other school districts doing? I'm happy to answer those questions, but I can tell you that a lot of putting together all those moving parts to make sure that we know, what those school districts are requiring of their students, so that we can figure out what to require of their staff members. Not sure what that noise is, but we'll just keep going.
It's not me.
So in terms of kind of the history, as you will recall, in March and April, as everything was shutting down, the federal government decided to put into the mix a new law that provided for 2 different types of leaves that we would use in addition to the traditional leaves that we have available under the state and federal FMLA, the state and federal disability discrimination laws, the ADA and the WFEA, as well as your policy-based leaves, and then the income replacement benefits that you offer, unemployment compensation being one of them, as well as long-term disability. So they put these two laws into place, or 2 types of leave into place through the FFCRA, the Families First Coronavirus Response Act. And when those 2 leaves were put into place, we had no idea how long this was going to go on. We did not know enough about the COVID-19 virus and how it might be transmitted, and did not know the impact that it was going to have on the workplace. So what you will see in these laws is that there are requirements that employers provide leave and provide paid leave under certain circumstances up to a certain amount. The EPSLA provides for 10 days or 80 hours for a full-time employee, and it applies when there is a situation that meets one of their criteria, one of them being that they're subject to a healthcare provider quarantining the individual, or they're subject to a state or federal or local order quarantining them, or that they need to be home to care for someone who is subject to an order or a healthcare provider's advice. This is a one-time thing in the law that was passed. And so what we see here is that the federal government requires us to provide for that 10 days or 80 hours, and doesn't take into account the possibility that someone might be quarantined multiple times. And so a lot of the questions that we're getting asked from educators, from other staff members, is what do we do if we had multiple incidents of quarantine? What happens if I'm quarantined because of exposure or because of advice from my healthcare provider, and then my husband gets quarantined and I have to care for him, or my child gets quarantined and I have to care for him or her? How does that work? Well, the law doesn't provide for additional incidents. It's not as though the FFCRA says every time you get a COVID-19 quarantine order, you're entitled to another 10 days. So many staff members are asking questions about what happens in the event that we have multiple situations. In addition, the FFCRA, which provides for this 12 weeks of compensation and leave to care for a child whose school or daycare provider has been closed due to COVID. That provision presumed that a closure was complete, that a closure was for a period of time. Maybe it was for up to 6 weeks, 10 weeks, whatever the situation might be. Didn't think about the fact that we might be coming back to school and offering some sort of a hybrid situation where students are going to school 3 days a week or 2 days a week. And then there would have to be some questions about, okay, who is taking care of the kids or supervising them while they're attending virtually. How does that work when someone wants to take their leave under the FFCRA and what do we do in that situation? And what happens if this extends beyond December 31st of 2020 when both of these laws expire? So we're kind of looking at these laws now from a new perspective because we have more information and recognizing that at least for the time being, the federal government has no real plan to update these laws or extend them or address kind of the situations that we're dealing with. So we've got those two issues, and we'll talk about that in a little bit more detail in a second. But I also want to make sure that we don't forget about the fact that we do have these other laws in place. We have the ADA and the Wisconsin Fair Employment Act that provide for not only a prohibition against discrimination on the basis of disability, so on the basis of an employee's disability, but it also provides for a requirement that we accommodate disabilities so as to allow individuals to perform the functions of their jobs. Now, accommodations could be any number of things. If we're looking at accommodations through the lens of COVID-19, we're asking ourselves about situations where someone has a medical condition and they and their healthcare provider have determined that because of their compromised immune system, they really need to stay home, that they need remote working or they need a leave of absence. And so we're having to explore those issues. And those may be, that may be leave that is first addressed through the EPSLA, the 10 days or 2 weeks or 80 hours, whichever way you want to look at it. And then if that extends further, because typically, we're not expecting that there's going to be a vaccine or some disappearance of this virus in 2 weeks. So we have to think about what does that mean after the 2 weeks are up. And in some cases, an employee is going to ask for an extended leave of absence as a reasonable accommodation of their disability, or they're going to ask for the opportunity to work remotely. And working remotely may work in certain situations. It may not work in other situations, depending upon, number one, the role that they have in the district, and number two, what you're offering in terms of in-person or virtual education. It is likely that not all of your positions are going to lend themselves to remote work, in which case we're going to have to look at these issues on a case-by-case basis and determine whether the person requesting that remote work opportunity is in a position that lends itself to working remotely. If it doesn't, that creates an undue hardship for the district. And then we have to move on to consider other types of accommodations for that individual. And one of them may be an extended unpaid leave of absence or paid leave of absence, depending upon what benefits they have available to them. They may also be eligible for your long-term disability benefits in the event that their doctors have suggested that they're unable to perform the functions of their job for some extended period of time. We also, when we're looking at accommodations through the lens of COVID-19, we're also looking at the mask or face covering issue. And I know we're not going to talk about that really today, but it's one thing that you should know that Mandy is going to have to be dealing with, is making sure that to the extent that people are asking for an exemption from the rule of wearing a mask in the school building or a face covering in the school building, that kind of an accommodation will need to be addressed. And that, whether we're able to accommodate those types of requests, may also turn into a leave of absence if we're unable to do so because of the type of position that the individual has and the inability to interact with the mask on, or the inability to to come into contact with certain types of students who have maybe their own immune compromised situations. So we may have to be looking at leaves for people who originally asked for an accommodation that is a leave of absence. In addition, we also have to remember the traditional FMLA, as I mentioned, with regard to the prohibition against discrimination in the Wisconsin Fair Employment Act and the ADA. That applies when an employee has a disability. There is no such thing in the state of Wisconsin. There is no such thing in the Seventh Circuit that governs our area. There's no such thing as association or disability by association. So if my child, for example, has a disability, It's not a violation of the Americans with Disabilities Act or the Wisconsin Fair Employment Act for you not to accommodate my assistance to that child. But that's not the end of the inquiry. Then we can move on to the Family Medical Leave Act, and I may be entitled to take leave in order to care for my child, my spouse, or my parent who may have a serious health condition that is either COVID or is a serious health condition that is related to COVID or exacerbated by COVID, and that may be something to deal with. Under the Families First Coronavirus Response Act, we also have, as I mentioned, this extended FMLA leave, this 10 weeks of paid leave that is paid at 2/3 the rate, and that is specific to an employee who wishes to take a leave of absence to care for their child whose daycare or school has been closed because of reasons related to COVID. And so we have to kind of collaborate and coordinate the leaves that are available to these individuals and figure out which apply and which don't apply under the circumstances in order to determine what they're entitled to. So you have all of that, so all of those legal issues. And then in addition, you have the policies and procedures that you have personally adopted in the school district of Fort Atkinson. That is your reimbursable leave provisions in your handbook. That is your vacation for some of your support staff employees. And you have some personal leave, things like that exist within your handbooks. Many school districts are utilizing that paid leave to allow individuals to supplement the 2/3 pay that they're receiving under the Families First Coronavirus Response Act to ensure that the individuals are receiving full pay. In other cases, school districts are deciding they want to encourage their staff to hold back that leave, to reserve it, because they may need it in the future. And they're simply saying that if you need that leave that is available to you under the Families First Coronavirus Response Act, and it only provides for 2/3 compensation up to this cap, then that's the amount that we're going to pay you. That's that discretionary part, because we want to make sure that your sick leave or your reimbursable leave in your situation is available to you when you need it at a later date. There are also times, as I mentioned before, because the Families First Coronavirus Response Act was put into place before we knew a lot about how this virus would work, there are a number of school districts that are considering what to do when someone is simply fearful of coming to work, or when someone just has a desire to take a leave that is unrelated to or is not covered by the specific provisions within the Families First Coronavirus Response Act or the Americans with Disabilities Act and Wisconsin Fair Employment Act, or the Family Medical Leave Act, or any of the provisions in the policies, that, is there something that we want to do to allow for an extended leave of absence to these individuals who don't qualify for these other types of leave, because of the fact that these are employees who are in hard to fill positions, because these are employees who are veteran employees who we'd like to retain, because there is some other reason why we'd like to keep them tethered to the district in this way, because we all know that this is going to be over at some point and we're going to need to go back to normal. If there is a desire to do that on a case-by-case basis or on a more broad basis, the district should be considering that, but also thinking about the fact that there is a cost associated with that, in the sense of, even if you're providing an unpaid leave of absence, you are holding on to a job that you can't fill now, because you were going to, you can't fill now with someone who you're expecting to be permanent or a regular employee, because you're holding on to that job for someone else in the future. And so there's some things that we would want to do in order to make sure that you're not in a situation where you are inadvertently having two people who are employed and being paid, or two people who are employed and having the ability to go into a job that you are holding on to for them. That's a lot of information that I just provided in a short period of time. I know that we provided a memo also, so that you have that, both Mandy's memo and my memo, as well as the attachment. I want to take just a breath here and see if there are any questions.
I don't have any questions at this point. I mean, it sounds like a lot of this stuff, I mean, if I understand it correctly, a lot of this stuff is actually going to be very case by case, or is this, we want to just create blanket policies, or is a lot of it going to be case by case?
I think this is blanket policies, Mark. I think there will be one-on-one situations that come up, if I'm not mistaken. I read through the memo. It's very thorough, and having worked in HR before, thank you. I know this stuff can get really complicated.
Thank you.
So in terms of the kind of the blanket policies that that I know that they're looking for from the administration, I mean, one question is with regard to that, the under the heading of discretionary decisions. One of the questions would be, are you planning on offering that supplemental pay for the times in which an employee is only entitled under the law to two-thirds compensation? Another issue is what you're planning on doing when you have multiple incidents where someone has utilized all of their EPSLA or all of their enhanced FMLA leave, or they're not entitled to any other type of leave. For example, if they are an individual who just simply is, doesn't have a disability, doesn't have a doctor who's willing to write a note indicating that they are unable to come to work due to a disability, but they still have the same kinds of fears that a lot of us have with regard to coming into the school building and working among a lot of people during a pandemic. What are you planning on doing with regard to those individuals? Is there going to be an opportunity for them to take an extended leave of absence? Or is this a situation where, because you still have the obligation to educate students, that you're going to have to make that tough choice and say to them that, we can't hold on to your job. You're going to either have to report or resign.
So are we, I guess, are we looking to make motions today on these specific things or on these policies, I guess, or are we just kind of getting the info?
So in my memo, Mark, and I don't know if you
Yeah.
had a chance to review it, I did.
No.
We've had some conversations at the administrative level.
Yeah.
Talking with building principals and trying to determine what it is that they need to make their building run well and provide what we need to provide for our students. And looking at the mirrored learning model that we have planned for this fall. So in that memo, I have included a number of different recommendations under the human resources considerations heading under each item. I guess I'm just curious in this meeting if there are any that the board disagrees with.
Okay.
I don't know procedurally if a motion needs to be made.
No, that's helpful, because I was just looking on clarity, like, how am I supposed to run this meeting? No, it's just an open discussion on these things. I did look over it Friday and then again today. I personally didn't see anything in here that I thought, I mean, some of these are just really hard to make decisions and they're hard to have conversations. But I don't specifically have anything that I was confused by, nor did I particularly disagree with. But does anyone else have anything they'd like to discuss? I really almost kind of would defer to Ms. Sneeden on a lot of this, because she has a lot of experience in it as far as a board member, and she hasn't brought anything up to me. And do you have anything to say, Rachel?
Yeah, no, I thought this was really well put together. And these are tough decisions that, you know, as an employer, we have to deal with. Mandy, thank you. And Shanna, thank you for putting those together. They're very clear. Anyone that's listening in from the public, if you're a teacher, staff, you please read them. But this is, I guess, from my chair, something that I've been seeing in my own job too. So thank you.
I think I would encourage staff to check this memo out, though it's included in board docs, because it's pretty concise considering the breadth of things. You know, it's only 5 pages, but it covers quite a bit of heady information. I mean, really, it's pretty deep info considering what we're facing. I mean, but when I think about it, I think that there are going to be a lot of, you know, conversations that people are going to have with their families and you know, with themselves about how they're gonna proceed. It's gonna be an interesting time again for us, but it's a new phase, I guess.
And I was able to review the document as well. Thank you, Manny, for putting it together. We've been dealing with it at work as well, but it's nice to have on paper of, you know, some different accommodations for some people and what we can expect to have here. So very well done on it. I appreciate it. It's written in a way we can understand. So thank you.
If I could be as direct, if the board has any questions about the 2/3 pay with a certain leave being augmented with accrued sick time, that is a point that I think districts are handling different, as Attorney Lewis pointed out. That's something, if you do have other questions or thoughts on that particular topic, that is one when districts are being compared to one another, that there is a distinguishing factor in some of the decision making. And then also the next bullet there regarding intermittent leave is one that is somewhat complicated. Ms. Harper and I have spent an awful lot of hours going through specific scenarios and situations for people, and it is not lost on anyone the difficulties and the complexities that people have in their personal and family lives in order to continue to deal with the pandemic at that level, as well as with their job as well. So unfortunately, though, as we've talked about with the board before, you know, there are parts of the position that are that of management and of needing to make some decisions, you know, somewhat applicable to everyone, knowing that there may be an extreme exception here or there, but those are two issues that I think, you know, you will definitely hear more about, or that will be talked about more after the school year is up and running. I think we, along with about 420 other public schools, are wrestling with what we will have September 1st when it comes to staff who have rightfully accessed leaves or other vehicles or have asked for accommodations in their workplace. So we're not behind, but this is yet another thing that requires intense urgency because the calendar is clicking by. So I appreciate Mrs. Harper, your memo, as well as Attorney Lewis. I thought they were very helpful. And I think in particular, the one that Mrs. Harper provided, I think really does a nice job, board members, of laying out some of those sort of localized issues that are supported with specific examples or requests that we've received thus far.
Yeah. Yeah. It was well done. I think everybody gave us a good presentation. Appreciate the comments, Dr. Abbott. Does anyone have any further questions or comments or concerns? I'm not trying to move to adjourn quickly here, but I just don't want to waste anybody's time if no one has any
Real quick, Mark. I'm reading about the 8 permanent building substitute teachers. I like that idea. Do you think we're going to run into any issues with being able to staff that with finding 8 substitute teachers? Or is that not an issue, you think, Mandy? Or whoever would like to answer, I suppose.
We're working with Teachers on Call right now to staff that. They have a recruiter local to Madison that is working to fill those positions. They have them posted on their website, both for internal and external subs that may be visiting that site. And I have also reached out to our building principals to get recommendations of different subs that have worked at times in their buildings that they would like Teachers on Call to reach out to principals for those positions. So I am hopeful that we'll have those in place for the start of the year.
So just this is purely for curiosity, Mandy. Has there been any conversation at all about emergency licensing people in the community?
The state is making provision for some alternative licensing options. And I like many things, I would say they continue to evolve. And adjust as we go. In all honesty, there has been a change in licensing enough over the past couple of years that certainly to be a substitute teacher, someone with a college background was able to, or currently is able to, apply to be a substitute teacher. They are making some other accommodations as well. I know the board, in some emails that we've received from community members, have expressed an interest in supporting our schools should we be short-staffed, which is obviously very much appreciated. And that's really what I would direct people to do, is to go to the either call Mrs. Harper or to go to the Department of Public Instruction website, and they do have some helpful information there as to what some of those new or adjusted requirements might be.
Well, I was just asking because that's how I got my license in my district I work in. So just throwing that out there. I also kind of wanted, that was a really nice segue, Dr. Abbott, to the, I would just add, since we're discussing Teachers on Call, I think has been fairly responsive through the entirety, and as a contracted service, it's been nice to see their level of responsiveness, as well as in some cases creativity. These long-term subs that you're hearing about now have some ability for us to end that arrangement if they're not needed, or if we have some other issues, or if our learning formats change. They've allowed us to have some outs there that I think, whether we need them or not, are nice for them to provide. And quite frankly, I think everyone is hearing about whether or not there will be enough teachers or staff or substitutes. And I feel like we've moved pretty prudently in accessing what's a new program for them. So that shouldn't be a concern then.
Well,
I mean,
to be honest, we're hoping to get some of the people that are really great subs for us, and for them to know where they're going to be or what district they're going to be in, and for us to have had some established relationship in some cases in the past would be helpful as well. I'll admit that with all of the hiring and all of the HR and other issues we have going currently, it is nice that Teachers on Call is handling that. And as a contracted service, there's very few things we can hand off, and this is one.
Well, that's good to hear. It's good to hear about that, because I know that was concern about it in the initial discussion phase of Teachers on Call.
I do think, you know, and not to overstate it, but I do think, just to reemphasize, that this couple of week period now before September 1st, there's a lot to be known for all districts as to what staff will be requesting leaves or accommodations or additional information based on what type of learning format we're opening with on September 1st. So this is, I think the timing of this meeting is superb in that there wasn't a whole lot to do other than build our knowledge base in the past, but now moving forward, things will need to happen fairly rapidly. I'd also just point out that these leaves can be accessed at any point. I know you heard that earlier, but I know I had a question from a teacher. Well, does a leave need to be submitted for review prior to your board meeting, your regular meeting on the 20th? And there are no deadlines. It's just that September 1st is a deadline of sorts because that's when schools are back in session, clearly. Mandy, do you have other items that you wanted to draw special attention to, or that you feel like the board may?
I don't think there's anything in particular other than the items that you brought up. I know the 2/3 and the intermittent leave were, items that we at least wanted to know that the board had considered and felt comfortable with the district's recommendation on how to move forward. I do think that just following this conversation and just kind of agreement with where the board is at, I think that'll give our staff some guidance on to making those decisions that they feel like they need to make, whether it be, requesting leave or some type of other accommodation or what have you. So I do think that this is, a great opportunity for us to share that information with staff, and I would anticipate that there will be a lot of communication coming my way in the coming weeks.
Could I ask, while we have council here, are districts taking formal action on these types of understandings?
So some are and some aren't. In many cases, the boards are delegating that authority to the administration, either affirmatively through a motion or simply through the policies that already exist, the job descriptions that describe what each of the administration's responsibilities are related to employment type decisions. In other cases, there are full-scale COVID-related addenda that are being approved by boards relative to an employee handbook or a personnel policy that describes the specific decisions that are made with regard to the supplemental income, whether intermittent leave will be approved across the board or only in certain situations. There is no science to that. It really is what your district feels comfortable with. If the administration feels like it has enough direction from the board without specific action taken, that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. If the board feels as though it must provide some specific directives in the form of action, that is okay too. It really is a local decision in that case.
So that would be something that Mr. Cheney, you and the board would want to think about based on what you just heard as well.
Whether we want to make these formal policy or make motions on them to put them in policy, is that?
Well, either take formal action, either in the affirmative or the negative on specific issues, some of which were detailed by Mrs. Harper, or by delegating the responsibility to the administration, either implied by position or by formal action, noting that those responsibilities are decided by the administration.
Yeah, okay. I was just making sure I was clear on.
Nope, that's great.
I do not have any. I personally don't think that we need to make formal motion. I think this is part of what the job description. This lies within the purview of the job description for administrative people. Does anybody disagree with that on the board? We can have discussion about that if that's something we'd like to talk about.
I'm going to agree with you, Mark. Let us get out of the way of their progress here.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I think if there was a major objection, we'd hear about it. But I think this responsibility belongs with our HR personnel and Rob and the admin team.
I would agree. One thing I wanted to say is we haven't heard anything from Mr. Paul. Mr. Paul, are you with us? And do you have any questions?
Yeah, I'm here.
I know you're here.
I'm good. I'm just.
Okay.
No, I think everything sounds great.
Okay, just checking. I just gotta make.
Mandy, I think it came up, and I think it's appropriate to discuss. I do believe you're going to be suggesting an addendum to the employee handbook to cover some of the COVID issues that I know procedurally, perhaps more than anything. Can I put you on the spot just a little bit to share with the board that may be coming their way? That would require action.
Yes, absolutely. This is actually a great conversation point. I've already have a COVID-19 addendum to the employee handbook in the works. I have a number of topics in there and was kind of waiting on some outcome from this meeting, and anticipate that I will be adding information from this meeting as part of that document, with the intention that whenever this COVID thing ends, then that document would naturally sunset. A lot will just be, the required procedural things that we just need to put in place now. Our new safety precautions, what our reimbursable absence process will look like during this time, the new laws that we need to comply with. But I hope to have that to the board soon for formal action.
And just for the viewing audience as well, I mean, that is typical action many districts are putting in place, just as Mrs. Harper described it. It sunsets with the pandemic. And in most cases, they're procedural types of items, logistics and operationalizing what our reopening handbook and other documents are asking students and staff to do as well. So I don't think there needs to be a huge amount of fear and concern over substantive changes to the employee handbook. It's more related to the specifics of COVID and how we operate. Is that accurate?
Yes, absolutely. And I think, to that point, typically any handbook changes do go through the personnel committee and then have several readings at the board meeting. Just given the time sensitive nature of everything that we're going through, as Dr. Abbott said, I think the more procedural, operational type things, just putting into words what our actions are and putting an employee position in place along with that operational handbook. I think we can kind of truncate that process just in the essence of time. Anything that would have a direct impact on staff, I can still see us going through the process to engage staff. So I want to assure anyone that's listening in that we don't plan to skip that process for items that warrant it.
Yeah. Thank you, Ms. Sauber. Is there any further discussion, board members? Would we like to comments, questions, concerns? Ms. Reynolds, anything? Again, I encourage the public to check the document that was supplied by our HR department. And again, thank you, Ms. Harper, for doing a great job of that. Thank you, legal, for being here. Thank you, Dr. Abbott, for coordinating this. It was helpful for everybody, I think. And I encourage the public to, again, look over those documents. And I'm sure Mandy will be busy in the near future with that, which means we will be too, I'm sure. So with that being said, we could entertain a motion to adjourn unless there's further conversation.
I'll motion to adjourn.
I'll second.
I have a motion by Mrs. Sneathen and a second by Mr. Nickram. All those in favor say aye.
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 And all those opposed. All right, thank you so much, everyone, for being here. Appreciate Mrs. Lewis being here. And all right, have a great rest of your day.
Thank you, board members.
Thank you. Bye-bye.